We're taking you live to Albury now, where Deputy Liberal Leader Sussan Ley is speaking.
Until the next election. Now, my question today for the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, who still seems to be in hiding, along with many of his ministers, all of whom are saying different things to the range of questions that they're being asked. My question is, who isn't working hard enough to deserve tax relief? Who doesn't make Labor's tax cut test? Is it a teacher on $70,000 a year who would get more than $600 in tax relief? Is it a nurse on $90,000 a year who would get more than $1,100 in tax relief? And over 250,000 nurses are affected right now by this. Is it a tradie on $130,000 a year who would get more than $3,000 in tax relief? And remember, these people are working 60, 70 hours a week. They're busting their gut to save for their futures, to pay their mortgages, which are increasing under Labor. How can it be that Labor is suggesting that nurses and teachers and tradies working 60 to 70 hours a week, working bloody hard for themselves, their families and their future, do not deserve this promised tax relief? Who doesn't make Labor's tax cut test? Happy with questions?
Thanks, Susan. Your government's last budget in office forecast 10 years of deficits. Sort of Liberals have always marketed themselves as the party of fiscal responsibility. Would it not be fiscally responsible to do something to drive up revenue and try and put the budget back towards something approaching a surplus, perhaps a little bit sooner?
Two things. This is about breaking a promise. This is about deceiving the Australian people. During the election campaign, when Anthony Albanese was very happy to agree to these tax cuts, the global uncertainties were known, the forward planning had been done, the fiscal modelling had been done. What this underscores, and what I also want to ask the Labor Party today is, was this your plan all along? Is this a deception that you always had in mind? To stand there, to issue press releases during the campaign and absolutely guarantee that the stage 3 tax cuts, as promised, would be delivered. And to break that promise now, was this always your plan? Because if it was, it just makes us even more determined to fight this every step of the way in the Parliament and beyond, every single day between now and the next election.
Susan, how else should the government pay for the rising cost of interest payments on debt, defence, the NDIS? Because surely something's got to give to pay for those ballooning expenses.
Those ballooning expenses and the challenges that the economy is facing were all present during the election campaign when Labor stood there and promised to agree to the stage 3 tax cuts and to actually allow them to pass into law, as they did. Now, it's not good enough to say, we're running out of money, we're coming after yours. Of course, that is what the Labor Party says, and that is what they do, and that's what their record is. We're running out of money and we're coming after yours. And it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. But it is a barefaced mistruth to have stood there in the last election campaign and agreed to these stage 3 tax cuts. And I want to know today, who is too rich to have promised tax relief, particularly as we go into uncertain times?
Susan, yesterday the Prime Minister gave an ironclad guarantee that there will be no changes to stage 3 tax cuts. It's exactly what he was asked, and it's what he said. The government has multiple times said that their position has not changed. Where is all this coming from? Is this something that you're whipping up?
Absolutely not. And I think the proof will be in the pudding. I listened to Anthony Albanese yesterday at his very brief press conference, and it sounded to me the plans haven't changed today, but the plans may change in the future. And you listen to the Finance Minister, Katie Gallagher, the person who is critical in designing the budget as the Finance Minister, saying there won't be any changes yet. And you listen to numerous Labor Party backbenchers who say, well, these aren't due to take effect for 2 years, and there's a lot of different opinions. And you have some who are actually supporting scrapping the promised tax relief. We have not heard an unequivocal guarantee from Prime Minister Anthony Albanese that unchanged, untouched, as promised, this tax relief will go ahead.
But we have, though. The question to him yesterday was, can you guarantee there will be no changes to stage 3? And he said, that's exactly what I'm saying.
I don't believe that he has guaranteed in a way that gives people the confidence and the comfort that they need. Because he has ministers and he has his own treasurer who are clearly softening up the Australian people to walk away from these tax cuts. Now, he might have it in his mind that he'll redesign them slightly and still call them the stage 3 tax cuts. He might have it in his mind that he'll change them and still call them the stage 3 tax cuts. That's absolutely not good enough. As designed, as promised, and as legislated by the Labor Party, these tax cuts need to go ahead. And for him to change them, he has to introduce legislation that we will fight every step of the way between now and the next election in every single corner of this country.
Susan, just on that, you mentioned plans to try and frustrate any moves to scrap the tax cuts in the Parliament. Given the government's got a majority in the lower house and a very friendly Senate to this idea at least, what possibly could you do to try and hold this up?
I'm looking to the independent members who've recently entered the Parliament to hear their stand on this. And maybe they could also ask their constituents, who among you is too rich or earning too much money to not need tax relief as promised by your government? Is it your nurses? Is it your tradies? Is it your teachers? Is it your families working hard, busting their guts 60 to 70 hours a week, put food on the table, pay increasing fuel prices, pay increasing mortgage prices, face an increasing cost of living squeeze between now and Christmas, and worry about so many things when it comes to your family budgets? Which one of you is not deserving of tax relief? And I think that's a question that the independents need to ask their own constituents. And while they've made some comments and issued some lines, it's really important that we hear from them. And it's really important that we know what conversations they've had with the government and exactly where they stand. Because in fighting any Labor changes to promised tax relief, we will be expecting all members of Parliament to stand up and answer that critical test. Who does not deserve tax relief right now?
Just on another topic, if I can, is it time to declare the end of the pandemic?
Always take the medical advice. We've got to note that we're coming out of winter and into spring and summer, and viruses, including COVID, drop away. But as I visited my mother in aged care this morning, an aged care centre that's managed a COVID outbreak incredibly well, like many of our hardworking aged carers across the country, they're looking after elderly Australians. But they also know that COVID is a critical illness if it gets in our older population. So it's really important that we protect them, and it's really important that we take the medical advice.